I knew things had shifted the second Evan Carlisle strolled into the Monday morning meeting like he owned the place. 21 years I'd been with Redwood Energy Corp here in Seattle, knowing every regulation, every quarterly rhythm, every trap that could sink us with the SEC. My record flawless. My audits untouchable. My reputation solid enough that board members often asked for my opinion before voting on anything big. I was the person they called when things got messy, but Evan didn't want steady hands. He wanted the spotlight, and I was in his way. He was 36 loud and clearly saw compliance as a speed bump on the road to his next bonus. In his first week, he trashed a risk assessment I'd spent 4 months preparing, called it paranoid theater, in front of the entire leadership team, and earned a few cheap laughs from his inner circle. I sat there gripping my coffee like it was the only thing keeping my hands occupied. I'd seen his type before, slick talker, short memory, allergic to facts that didn't fit his version of reality. It started small, a quiet override of my recommendations here, an ignored caution there. He'd arrive late to meetings, slam open his laptop like he was cracking a safe, then announce we'd be to impress investors. Translation: make the numbers look prettier than they were. I pushed back politely at first, reminding him that every shortcut came with a paper trail, and paper trails blow up when regulators come knocking. He smirked, patted my shoulder like I was some relic from another era, and said, "That's why we have lawyers." I didn't respond. I just logged the date time and his exact words in a private file. If you work long enough in compliance, you learn half the job is preparing for the day someone thinks they're smarter than the rules. Within 2 weeks, my sign-off on major reports was no longer necessary. Projects I'd overseen for decades skipped my desk entirely. In department updates, he'd toss out lines about moving forward without unnecessary delays, and everyone knew he meant me. I kept my expression calm, but each time I noted how he scanned the room for laughs afterward. He craved an audience. I also noticed the interns and junior analysts avoiding eye contact. Not because they disliked me, we'd always gotten along, but because they didn't want to be seen siding with the woman Evan Carlisle had decided to put in his crosshairs. Enough before. But because they didn't want to be seen siding with the woman Evan Carlisle had clearly marked for elimination. I'd weathered my share of storms in over 2 decades at Redwood Energy Corp, but the speed and brazenness here were something else entirely. He wasn't just arrogant, he was reckless. The moment I knew this would get ugly came during a Thursday all-hands. Evan presented an updated investor outlook with numbers I knew were fantasy. I'd reviewed the raw data from operations just a week earlier. Projections were at least 15% lower. Yet there he was, clicking through slides like a carnival barker, promising record-breaking quarters and unprecedented investor confidence. When our eyes met, he didn't flinch. He smirked. That was the tell these weren't mistakes. They were calculated fabrications. And the worst part? A few in the room actually clapped. Afterward, I returned to my office, shut the door, and stared at my monitor. 21 years of protecting this company from its own ambition, and now a man willing to burn it down for a glossy quarterly report. My gut said this was only the opening act, so I began documenting every meeting, every memo, every conveniently updated spreadsheet. Time-stamped, backed up to an encrypted drive only I could access. Not because I intended to use it immediately, but because compliance work teaches you one truth: when the match is lit, someone will ask who struck it, and I planned to be ready. The first real crack appeared in a quarterly expense breakdown. Nothing obvious, just a payment to a vendor I didn't recognize for an amount just under the threshold that required board pre-approval. Easy to miss unless you were trained to look for it. I pulled reports from the last 2 quarters. The vendor had never appeared before yet. Now they showed up twice in the same quarter under different project codes. Could it be a legitimate contract? Maybe sloppy bookkeeping? Or exactly what it looked like: someone parking money out of sight? The next day, I brought it to Evan's office. He leaned back, scrolling his phone like we were about to head to the golf course. I outlined the anomaly and suggested we request supporting documentation before sign-off. He didn't bother looking at the papers. "We're just streamlining for investor presentations," he said, sliding the documents back toward me. "No one cares about the background noise if the big picture looks good." That was the moment my suspicion turned into certainty. This wasn't carelessness. It was a facade. I suggested we request documentation before sign-off. Evan didn't even glance at the pages. He smirked, leaned forward, and said, "We're just streamlining for investor presentations. No one cares about the background noise if the big picture looks good," he added, sliding the papers back like I'd offered him a bad lunch menu. That was the moment my suspicion solidified into certainty. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about constructing a facade. Streamlining was corporate code for hiding the parts that wouldn't photograph well. And the man in charge was either too arrogant or too dirty to care. The foundation was rotting. That afternoon, I met Maria from accounting for coffee. She'd been at Redwood almost as long as I had, sharp, discreet, and smart enough to keep opinions off company email. I told her what I'd found, careful with my words in public. She didn't look surprised. "If you think this chapter was wild, wait until you hear what happened next. Hit subscribe, so you don't miss the moment the tables turn for good." "I've been seeing things too," she said quietly, stirring her coffee slowly. "Small shifts in the ledger, deferred entries. Not enough to scream fraud, but enough to make me uneasy." We sat in silence, the hum of the cafe between us. Then she met my eyes. "Watch your back. He's not stupid. He's counting on everyone being too scared to speak." I didn't need convincing. Back at my desk, I began a private log, nothing on company systems, nothing tied to my work email. Every anomaly, no matter how small, dates, amounts, project codes, who signed off. Patterns reveal themselves over time, and this one was forming fast. If it continued, we weren't just dealing with creative accounting. This could sink the company and anyone caught in its blast radius. 2 weeks later, the line between sloppy and criminal was gone. I was in Maria's office reviewing the draft quarterly report before it went to the board. The revenue numbers looked inflated, far above what I'd seen from operations, unless we'd struck oil beneath the building. Maria looked pale. She closed the door, then slid a sticky note toward me like we were in a spy exchange. In her careful handwriting, "Director wants plus 112% for optics. Says fix the rest next quarter. 12%. That's not optimism. That's fiction in a suit." I asked if she'd made the changes. She hesitated, then opened a hidden folder on her desktop. Inside were 2 versions of the report, one real one built for show. Inside were 2 versions of the quarterly report, the original, and the revised one Maria had been ordered to send. Every inflated figure appeared in the investor-facing summaries, with nothing in the underlying documentation that could withstand an audit. "This is fraud," I said quietly. Maria nodded but wouldn't meet my eyes. "I know. But if I refuse, I lose my job. You will too if you push back." Back in my office, I didn't waste a second. I saved both versions to my encrypted personal drive, along with Maria's sticky note and the email chain requesting the changes. I time-stamped everything. In compliance, the truth is only as strong as the paper trail you preserve, and I was building one meant to last. That afternoon, I filed an internal report through the official compliance channel. No accusations, just a side-by-side comparison and a recommendation to halt release until discrepancies were addressed. I copied the CFO and legal, certain one of them would see the problem. The next morning, the report came back, not from the CFO or legal, but forwarded by Evan himself. No comments, no questions, just 2 words: "We're aligned." Then proceed. Not only had my warning been ignored, it had been delivered straight to the man I was effectively accusing. Now he knew I was documenting him. In his eyes, I wasn't just a nuisance slowing his streamlining. I was a threat that needed removal. I sat at my desk weighing the options. I could quit quietly, let the collapse happen without me. Or I could stay dig in and make sure when this blew up, I wouldn't be taken down with it. It wasn't really a choice. I zipped my jacket pocket over the encrypted drive heavier now with evidence, and reminded myself of what I'd told dozens of junior analysts. If you're going to play the game, you'd better know the rules and how to write them down. Only now I wasn't protecting Redwood Energy from outside risk. I was protecting myself from the man running it, and something told me he'd already started planning his next move. The shift from quiet hostility to open fire came fast. One Monday morning during a meeting on Q2 audit readiness, I asked a question about reconciling investor summaries with operational data. Evan didn't even let me finish. "You're being difficult again," Evan said, flashing that condescending smile he used to pull the room onto his side. "We've already aligned on the numbers. Let's not get stuck in compliance quicksand." A few chuckles drifted around the table, nervous ones from people who didn't want to be next on his list. I leaned back, pen in hand, letting him think he'd won. "In my experience, you don't need to win the room, you just need to keep the record straight." By Wednesday, HR sent me a calendar invite for a performance review, my first in over a decade. No warning, no annual cycle. Just an abrupt evaluation of my fit with the new leadership structure. I nearly laughed. 21 years of spotless reviews, promotions, and bonuses, and now I was suddenly a problem. The meeting was exactly as expected: vague comments about collaboration and adaptability, nothing specific. I smiled, nodded, took the printed notes, and mentally filed them in my growing evidence folder. Weaponized performance reviews aren't about improving performance, they're about laying the groundwork for termination. That Friday night, I called my sister. It was supposed to be a casual check-in. She's younger, lives out of state, and her life is a revolving door of deadlines. She's a journalist, not the fluff piece kind, but the type who disappears into a story for months, resurfaces with a Pulitzer nomination, and vanishes again until the next big one hits. She sounded tired but razor sharp, the way she gets when she's in deep. I asked how work was going. "Knee-deep in a major WSJ piece." "Could be career-defining," she said. She didn't elaborate, and, normally, I wouldn't push. But with the mess at Redwood, my curiosity wasn't casual. So I asked as evenly as I could, "Does it involve companies manipulating investor reports?" Silence, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then a faint exhale through her nose. "You know I can't talk about that." That was my answer. If my gut was right. Her big story and Evan Carlisle's games weren't just in the same arena, they were on the same field. While I'd been building a file to protect myself, she'd been building one to burn everything down. We changed the subject, our parents, her cat's habit of walking across her keyboard mid-interview. But after we hung up, my mind was already running the angles. I'd been playing defense. Now I saw another path. From that night forward, I documented as if someone would one day read it aloud in a courtroom or print it above the fold. Evan thought I was just being difficult. He had no idea how difficult things were about to get. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a building where the wiring was already smoldering. You couldn't see flames yet, but the heat was rising. Every meeting, every hallway exchange, every offhand directive from him went into my growing archive. I began pulling board meeting minutes, the polished versions from the company portal, and the unfiltered ones passed to me by people who trusted I wouldn't burn them. The official minutes were PR gloss, each decision wrapped in corporate spin. The unofficial ones exposed the rot-skipped due diligence pressure to adjust metrics before investor calls, backroom deals bypassing compliance. Internal memos were gold. Evan favored vague but loaded phrases: "make sure the forecast aligns with our talking points," or "adjust the narrative before sending to investors." He never said "change the numbers," but anyone with experience knew exactly what he meant. I screen-capped them all, complete with timestamps and metadata. Spreadsheets were the most damning. I kept side-by-side copies, raw operational data, and the refined version for external eyes. The differences weren't subtle. Entire expense categories disappeared. Revenue streams doubled without contracts to justify them. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was theater, and the playwright was getting bolder. Every few nights after Seattle went quiet, I transferred the latest batch to my encrypted drive. Then I sent curated packets to my sister via our secure drop. No company names or direct identifiers, but the patterns, dates, and figures were enough for anyone in the industry to connect the dots in under a minute. As my evidence pile grew, Evan's behavior shifted from irritation to micromanagement. Twice a day, he'd appear unannounced at my desk, demanding updates on reports I wasn't even assigned. He started CCing himself on my emails, adding "keep me in the loop," which read, more like, "I'm watching you." The absurdity peaked one morning when he appeared with a coffee in one hand and a sticky note in the other. It read, "Draft new compliance policy." No scope, no details, just a vague order meant to keep me spinning my wheels while he dissected whatever I delivered. When I asked for clarification, he smirked. "Show me you can adapt." That's when it hit me the fear was gone. Weeks earlier, I'd been cautious, calculating the risks. Now, with every document saved and every transfer made, I wasn't worried about my job. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was feeding a fire that, when it caught, would burn hotter than anything Evan could imagine, and I wasn't even breaking a sweat. Every petty power play he threw at me, every smirk, every jab, every micromanaged task was just another log on the blaze. He thought he was cornering me. In reality, he was building the walls of his own pyre, and I was handing him the matches. It was supposed to be a routine quarterly review, a pre-board alignment session where department heads walked through their numbers. But the moment Evan's slides hit the screen, I knew this would end badly. The charts weren't just optimistic. They were fiction. Revenue projections inflated by double digits. Expense lines shaved to impossibility. Cash flow forecasts that looked like they'd been lifted from a motivational seminar instead of our accounting system. I let him get 3 slides in before speaking my voice, calm, deliberate. "These numbers don't match the operational reports from last week," I said, flipping to my printed copies. "In fact, the discrepancies are large enough that under SEC guidelines, they could be considered materially misleading to investors." The room went still. The hum of the projector seemed louder. Evan's eyes narrowed, a vein throbbing at his temple. "Are you accusing me of lying to the board?" he snapped. "I'm pointing out that these figures do not align with documented internal data," I replied evenly. It wasn't my first confrontation, but it was the first time I'd challenged him in front of half the leadership team. That was all it took. He shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "You've been undermining me since the day I got here. You think you're protecting the company? You're sabotaging it. You're sabotaging me." The CFO shifted uncomfortably. HR glanced between us like they were watching a slow-motion wreck. Evan turned toward the door and waved to the 2 security officers standing outside. "Get her out of here!" he barked. One stepped forward, hesitant. "Sir, is this now?" Evan cut him off. I stood slowly, stacking my papers neatly before sliding them into my briefcase. My pulse stayed steady. No panic. No urge to defend myself. Because I knew something no one else in the room did. By this time tomorrow, none of this would matter. As I reached the door, his voice followed, sharp and loud. "We'll make sure no one in this industry hires you again." A couple of people winced. Others kept their eyes fixed on their notepads. I didn't look back. Security escorted me to my office, letting me pack a small box, photos, a few books, the brass paperweight my father gave me when I landed the job 21 years ago. I left my company laptop locked on the desk, knowing every keystroke was already backed up somewhere they couldn't touch. At the elevator, one guard muttered, "Sorry." I gave him a small, knowing smile. On the surface, it was humiliating. No one enjoys being walked out in front of colleagues. But beneath the calm, there was satisfaction. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with proof, weeks of meticulously documented evidence stored securely, and a sister in a newsroom waiting for the final piece to fall into place. As the elevator doors closed, my reflection didn't look beaten. I looked ready. The trap was set. All that remained was for it to spring. That night, I didn't sleep, not from anxiety but anticipation. My phone sat on the nightstand while I sipped bourbon in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum and tires hiss on wet pavement outside. The office box stayed unopened in the corner. It wasn't a wound to dwell on. It was a trophy I hadn't claimed yet. At 6:04 a.m., my phone buzzed. One message from my sister. It's live. I didn't need a link. I opened the Wall Street Journal homepage. There it was. The company name in bold, Evan Carlisle's name in the subhead, and the phrase, systematic financial misrepresentation for the world to see. The first paragraph was surgical. No drama, no speculation, just hard facts, altered SEC filings, internal directives to adjust narratives. Halfway down, I saw it, the first pull quote from an internal memo word for word from a document I'd sent her. The exact one Evan believed would never see daylight. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the rush of seeing the final piece click into place. Every late-night transfer, every screenshot, every moment I'd bitten my tongue instead of firing back all of it, was there stripped of spin. His name appeared again and again tied to board minutes and investor presentations. The language was damning precise. No wiggle room, no corporate euphemisms. She even laid out side-by-side comparisons of internal and external spreadsheets, the discrepancies clear and brutal. It was a compliance officer's dream and a PR department's death sentence. By 7 a.m., the Wall Street Journal piece was ricocheting across LinkedIn and Twitter. My feed lit up with shares from industry analysts, compliance officers, and even former regulators. People were tagging Redwood Energy's official account. A few bold employees from inside posted it with one-word captions, "Wow. Finally. Unbelievable." Then came the investors. I didn't need insider updates to see the fallout. Within hours, half a dozen issued public statements, each one dripping with legal threat. Phrases like breach of fiduciary duty and seeking remedies started appearing in press releases. At 8 a.m., Maria texted, "Phones are ringing off the hook here. He's locked in his office. CFO looks like he hasn't slept in a week." I could picture it perfectly. Evan pacing behind his desk, jaw-tight, tie loosened, realizing this wasn't going to blow over. This wasn't about me, HR, or his ego anymore. This was bigger. The adrenaline hit like a second cup of coffee. For weeks, I'd carried the truth in silence, calculating every word, every move. Now it wasn't my secret, it was public record. And that meant freedom. I closed the WSJ tab, set my phone down, and finally opened the box from my office. On top was the brass paperweight my father gave me when I started here 21 years ago. I set it on my desk and smiled. It wasn't just a keepsake, it was proof I'd left on my own terms, even if no one in that building understood it yet. The game had changed. And for the first time in months, I wasn't on defense. By mid-morning, Maria's texts came so fast I silenced notifications just to think. The first subject line said it all: emergency board meeting, everyone's losing it. From her desk in accounting, she had a front-row seat. First came the assistants darting between offices with folders clutched like live grenades. Then IT summoned to secure systems, but really to lock down access before more leaks. By 10 a.m., the elevator was spitting out board members in rapid succession ties, half-done jackets missing, all with the same expression: damage control mode. Maria's last text before lunch was short. Director stormed in. CFO's already here. Legal right behind him. Board chair just shook his head like he wants to throw something. Then came the update that made me lean back in my chair, grinning like I'd just heard the punchline to a joke I'd been saving for months. First question from the chair. Why does the lead journalist's byline have the same last name as the woman we fired yesterday? I could see it in my head. The stunned silence, the quick glances around the table, the slow realization that this wasn't just bad press. This was personal, surgical. They hadn't just been blindsided by a national paper, they'd been blindsided by someone they thought they'd crushed on the way out. Maria's texts painted chaos legal counsel whispering urgently into the chair's ear, his jaw tightening. Board members flipping through printed copies of the article, stopping at highlighted quotes they recognized from confidential memos. The CFO rubbing his temples like he could erase numbers by pressing hard enough. They keep saying it's exaggerated, Maria wrote. Board's not buying it. Chair just asked about the missing revenue. He's dodging. I could picture Evan's voice getting faster, sharper, desperate for control. But this wasn't his investor slide deck. This was a room staring at the documents he'd tried to bury, now in the hands of federal regulators and the press. And me, I didn't need to be there. My presence was already in the room, stitched into every quote, every spreadsheet, every side-by-side comparison in the article. They didn't have to see me to feel the damage. By Maria's last update, they've gone into closed session. Director looks like he's about to break something. I leaned back, watching late morning lights spill across the city. For months, I'd been reacting, dodging, staying one step ahead. Now I was the shadow he couldn't shake, the variable in his equation he'd never account for. He thought he'd written the ending when he had me walked out. He didn't realize he'd just handed me the pen. Maria's final text came minutes later. He suspended. Effective immediately. No drawn-out deliberation. No carefully worded temporary leave. The board chair dropped the hammer before lunch, citing pending internal and external investigations. Everyone knew what that meant. Evan was done. By mid-afternoon, the wires carried it. SEC inquiry launched. DOJ reviewing matter. The company's press release tried to sound in control, but words like full cooperation with authorities read less like leadership and more like surrender. The company's press release read less like corporate reassurance and more like a confession wrapped in legalese. I didn't have to wonder if my sister was watching the fallout; she was fueling it. 2 days later, her follow-up piece hit. This time, it didn't just name the fraud, it mapped it. Clean timelines, transaction chains, testimony from former and current employees, most off the record, all telling the same story. And there it was, midway through the second section, a quote from an anonymous senior compliance officer with 21 years at Redwood Energy. My words, my evidence, my fingerprints. Reading it, I felt equal parts pride and detachment. Pride because it was mine. Detachment because once it was in print, it belonged to the public. The verdict was no longer in my hands. Investors roared, threats of lawsuits, demands for leadership changes, calls for immediate restitution. The market punished the company like it had been waiting for an excuse. Stock price down double digits in a single day, analysts slashing ratings. By week's end, 3 major clients had terminated contracts in light of recent developments. Every headline carried Evan Carlisle's name. Mine stayed out of print, but people in the industry connected the dots. My inbox lit up not with pity, but with offers. Compliance directors at other firms, risk consultancies, even a couple of federal agencies quietly testing the waters. The man who swore I'd never work in this industry again had, through his arrogance, turned me into someone known for taking down a corrupt executive without breaking stride. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't in a rush. For the first time in years, I could choose my next move without watching my back. One quiet evening, I picked up the brass paperweight my father gave me when I joined Redwood, turned it over in my hand, thought about Evan's parting words as security walked me out. We'll make sure no one in this industry hires you again. The irony tasted better than any victory speech. He'd set out to bury me. Instead, he'd written me into the short list of people in this business who couldn't be bought, bullied, or silenced. Now, anywhere I wanted to work, I could. I've walked through boardrooms where the truth was treated like an inconvenience, and I've stood at the door as security walked me out for daring to protect it. If you've followed my story this far, you know this wasn't just about one executive or one company. It was about the choice to stand your ground when it's easier to look away. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have stayed silent to keep your seat at the table, or would you have risked it all to make sure the truth saw daylight? Your thoughts might help someone facing their own crossroads right now. And here's the advice I've carried through every fight: document everything, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of staying calm when the other side wants you rattled. Integrity isn't built in the easy moments. It's forged when it costs you something to keep it. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Not just to follow me, but to keep these stories alive, because silence protects the wrong people. And I'm done being silent.